Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Two Bi Guys, continuing this series about bisexual married men, which is related to my book, Bisexual Married Men Stories of Relationships, Acceptance, and Authenticity. I'm very excited today to be joined by the first oral history chapter interviewee in my book. His name in the book is Gregory, I believe. Is that right? But his real name is Charles. So welcome to Two Bi Guys. Charles, nice to see you.
It's good to see you too. Thanks for having me on here.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you again. And I'm so excited you're in the book. Like, you were one of the last people to be included, and you ended up as chapter one of the interviews. And we met at by request. And
Yeah,
as when I told you about this project, and I had like one or basically, maybe one or two more interviews I needed, and you fit the bill, and we're happy to do it. And I'm so glad it worked out.
same. I was really so excited that you were doing that you were embarking on the project, hearing about it. And it sort of really fed into the reason why I go to By Request, right? To have a place to sort of talk about what it means to be a bi man and a bi man who's married and why and how that fits into my life. And so it was a really I was really glad that you were working on the project.
Cool. I'm so excited to share it with everyone. It's interesting. Now that I'm here with you, this isn't on my list of questions, but I didn't know what order I would put them in. And then I think part of why I decided to put yours first is it really just encompassed a lot of different things that many people I think have been through. Not your unique situation.
Right.
Your story is quite unique, especially your childhood and your family, and there's lots of interesting stuff in there. But the ways that different things connected back to your sexuality and the ways that you came out, I just thought were really a good intro to this experience and a good representation. I'm curious, when you read it back, when I sent you the
Mhm.
chapter and you read it back, how did that feel reading it? Or what went through your mind?
I thought you would. The first thing that went through my mind was like, "Wow, Rob really made my story sound really pretty good." So I was really grateful for that. um, but it's really helpful to really see my story reflected back at me, and it's a lot of things that I think about obviously all the time that I have experienced, but you know, to sort of see myself reflected back at me through someone else's perspective, right?
Mhm.
Taking the things that we talked about, but really you using your experience and your talents as a writer to sort of bring that back. I actually was really humbled in a way.
Hmm.
I I've been doing a lot of writing recently, and one of the things that I've been thinking, just for myself, not planning to be a writer, but one of the things that I've been really thinking about is this concept of who wants to hear your story, right? Like your story, is your story unique enough to be compelling, and can people learn things from you? And I get very self-conscious about that. Like, I haven't done anything monumental or change the world in any way, and so to sort of see me there, um and to think about it in the context of the larger book was very humbling, and I was like, oh, this is really nice.
Yeah. Yeah, that is really interesting. And like I think about that a lot too, of like what stories in me are vital to share, and what's the audience for them, and yeah, who's caring about this. And I think these stories are so hidden and invisible that there is a real need to share them, even when, you talk about yourself, maybe it sounds like not the most exciting story in the world, or not the, I don't know, I'm not thinking of yours specifically, but it's just
Right.
like life stuff. but actually there's a lot of challenges and joys and conflict and solutions and so many other people going through similar things that would benefit from just seeing that and hearing about it, even if it seems kind of normal. So yeah, I'm excited you shared it. Can you tell us, like, so there's going to be a lot more in the book. Everyone should read this chapter, but give us the cliff notes of like how did you realize you were bi? What was your bisexual journey?
Well, I think I really knew from a pretty young age, certainly in my teens, that I was attracted to men. But I was in my younger age, I was a serial monogamist. I dated women for years, and then you know then I would we would break up, and then I would date another woman for years, and so it was just never um, a thing that I acted on. It was funny because I was looking, as an aside, recently. I was looking over the Black Friday weekend, doing some shopping, and I was looking for some, fun underwear to wear to, parties and events and stuff. And then I was like, oh, and then in my mind popped International Male Catalog, right? And it was this, if you don't know what it is, in the 90s, it was this, men's underwear catalog, like an actual catalog that you got. And I remember like getting it, and like that was one of those like sort of, without actually having pornography, right? Like you could
Yeah.
see really hot guys in
Uh-huh.
sexy underwear, right? Like kind of thing. So that was always, since I was a teenager, a thing. And it really wasn't until college and right after college that, I actually had any opportunity to do anything sexual with a man. And I just knew, it was so comfortable because I knew so many queer folks in college, and after college, I moved to San Francisco, and so I just felt comfortable. And most of my friends kind of thought it was a thing that was going to happen with me anyway. Like they were just waiting, you know.
Uh,
Um, and so, that's really how it sort of just developed over time.
yeah. It's funny you mentioned the underwear catalog. You're not the first person in this interview series even to mention underwear ads as a bi awakening. For me it was the bags from Abercrombie and Fitch. And
Hmm.
the bags always had usually men and women in very little clothing, and I would save the bags and look at them, and in my head I was like, "Oh, I'm attracted to the women and like the guys are just there." But looking back, I was attracted to everyone on those bags. Did you struggle with accepting this about yourself at any point, or was it natural when you started exploring it?
Well, I mean, well, when I started exploring it, it felt natural. But I will say, right, like it was because I had these long-standing, really intense relationships with women. It was easy for me to not engage with
Hmm.
that, right? And at that time, I mean, not that it's super easy now to live your own truth in terms of your sexuality, but it's easier than it was in the 80s and 90s, right?
Hmm.
And I probably had read like the Kinsey report and the Height report and all those things, and I was like, oh, there's some level of it being natural to find both sexes attractive, right? There's nothing inherently different, or special about that. And I really do love these women, and I'm so into them sexually and everything else that it was sort of just like an easy thing to not engage with. It was sort of a cop out almost in the end, to think about like, oh, whatever. and like I said, like I just was probably in the most comfortable environment to to come out, with friends of mine, many of whom were queer, in San Francisco, like running a theater company. It's like, Jesus, could I make it any more comfortable, right? Like, um, to start exploring that, and almost then it was like, well, I can, you know, come out as bi or own up to this because um, then I'll be even cooler to all these people that I
Right.
previously was,
If you
right?
if you're running a theater company in San Francisco, it's probably weird to be straight.
Yeah, it's like, the boring guys. I was like,
Yeah.
wait, hold on, I'm not quite as vanilla as you think. Um, so yeah, it was once that happened, then it was just easy.
Yeah, cool. And then how out were you when you met your wife? And if you could tell
Mhm.
us a little bit about how your sexuality has factored into that relationship.
Well, it was interesting because at the point in time when I met my wife, I was in a place where I wasn't really dating, period. I had just, I'm trying to get my timeline straight. Because at this point, like my wife and I have been together for so long, it's like, you know, BC and AD, like I barely remember a time before that.
How long have you been
Um,
together?
just about 20 years.
Wow, cool.
Yeah. But I was in a period of really just not dating. I was working a lot, and you know, um, for whatever reason, just wasn't in that headspace. And we met at work, started working there. So it wasn't like this is one of the things that I often think about still now, and I talk about in bio, we all of us talk about in bio request is like, at what point does being bi matter that you bring it up, right?
Mhm.
Like, and it's a thing that, you know, as I was going into any relationship, I wanted to make sure that whomever the person was would know, right? But do you lead with that? Do you bring it up 4 months in? Like, what is the appropriate time?
Mhm.
And if the contours of your relationship are going to be monogamous, right? Like, do you even need to bring it? Like, what is it gonna matter? But to me, it was always important to at least have that level of authenticity for myself, right? So it was less of, oh, you need to know this about me for you. It was more that I want you to know this about me for me.
Mhm.
So that, like if I want to say we're watching a movie and we're like, oh my God, they're both so hot, or just whatever dumb thing, right? Like, I don't want to have to be closeted to the person who I'm sharing my life with, right? Like,
Right.
it seems destructive um, to me and to the relationship. So I'm trying to remember how early on. I mean, I think I sort of brought it up initially nonchalantly and just sort of like talking about, various relationships and experiences I had, and then being like, oh yeah, you know, oh yeah, I didn't tell you about that before. Oh yeah,
Uh-huh.
I'm bi too. Like, I was like, oh,
Mm.
and it was a little bit of a I don't want to say an adjustment, but like, you know, that had to sink in,
Uh-huh. You kind of
for
eased
her.
into coming out in a way?
Yeah, and or my whole thing was like, I'm just gonna say this, right? Like, if we're talking about past relationships, I'm just gonna say this like it was normal because you know what? It's normal.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And let's see how that goes over.
Uh-huh.
Um, and again, that was a way of thinking, for everyone who reads the chapter in the book, that was sort of given to me by my love of Hello Kitty, right? Like, just
Yeah.
own it. Like, if you love it and it's who you are, just wear it on your sleeve, or just approach it like it's normal. And you know what?
right,
9 times out of 10, people will be like, "Oh yeah,"
right.
and that's what happened. So,
Yeah. Do you still have some hesitation around, like, it being totally normal? Because you said that, and I hear you, but you laughed at what you said. Like, what goes through your mind, when you think about that?
well, it's funny because what I do, one of the things that I still am working on is trying to separate my sexuality from sexual activity, right?
Mhm,
Um, and one of the things I often think about is like, now bringing it up with someone I'm going to be in a relationship with, or someone who's a really good friend of mine is one thing. But like, when I think about it in terms of work and colleagues and I work in education at a school, like, my whole thing is like, well, what my sex life is should stay out of school. But like, because and I think about this, I go back and forth about this. It's really complicated. Is I don't go around telling people like, "Oh, hey, I'm straight," right? Like,
right.
or like no one does that, right? And people know I'm married, and I feel like in certain contexts, that's all you need to know.
Mhm,
But then at the same time, I sometimes feel like, well, am I? You get in your head. It's like, well, am I ashamed of this? Am I hiding it? It's like, well, no. It's just like, what is the reason I'm bringing this up in this context,
mhm,
right? But at the same time, like, I went to some Halloween parties, met some people, and you know, if it comes up in conversation, I have no problem saying
mhm,
it, right? Like, oh yeah, like, I'm bi because you know it makes sense in that context. So it still seems complicated because the only way to not the only way, I don't want to say that, that's incorrect, but one of the predominant ways that being bi would manifest itself for me right now is if I'm speaking about an attraction to about a man, or um, having some sort of sexual interaction with a man, and I just don't feel like that's everyone doesn't need to know about all of those things about me all the time.
yeah, yeah.
Same, about any relationship I would have with a woman.
Right, right. It makes a lot of sense, and it's like all the issues you're talking about, it's like you can see both sides of the coin, and neither one is 100% correct, and you're finding, like, where is the balance of
Yeah,
this is important to me, and, like, you want to be visible when appropriate, but also not necessarily be talking about sexuality to everyone you meet.
yeah,
That is kind of the struggle for bi people because it can be erased and invisible when you're married to a
yeah.
woman. So it's like when is it important to share? When do you not want to be invisible? Do you remember how your wife reacted at the time, or then beyond that, what's her view?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely remember. I mean, there was that moment of, I think, a little bit of shock, right? A surprise, like, oh, like I was not expecting that, right? um, and I do think, she had, and I hate putting attributing motivation and feelings to people when they can't do it themselves, but I do think that there was that little bit of fear that people who have bi folks as partners of like, well, does that mean you're going to need to cheat on me or exercise that part of your sexuality if we're in a committed relationship, right? So
Mhm.
it goes pretty quickly to that worry, right? Um, you know, and I think, so many of us experience that, whether or not if I was in a relationship with a man, there would be that sort of thing. And, it was just sort of like, well, will you need to sort of indulge in like, your attraction to the for men, is that a thing that is um, a necessity, right? And I think, and it was not for me, um, at all, honestly. Um, but that's a fear that comes up, and we talk about this in Buy Request almost every month. Someone,
Mhm.
you think about that, um, and if you're in a relationship with them, if you're a man in a relationship with a man, like how they, might think, oh, this is you're going to leave me for a woman as soon as you get the first opportunity, and there's always that sort of stigma, not always, but there's often that
Mhm.
stigma that you know being bi correlates to being somehow untrustworthy, or that you're going to cheat or duplicitous or something, or greedy or something like that.
Mhm. Mhm. So how did you guys work through that? Was it a long struggle?
No, it wasn't a struggle at all,
Mm.
and I mean, initially it was not a struggle at all. I mean, like I said, I at that point was a real serial monogamous. Like, to me, like, one relationship, it's all I wanted and had the bandwidth for, even when I was young, like I never emotionally, right? Like that connection is with like a romantic love relationship with someone. I put a lot into it, and it takes a lot, out of me, especially given, my close relationship with my family and my friends. It's a lot of places to spread sort of your emotional self, right? So I didn't need um, to have multiple relationships, and I've never been a person who was driven by sex. Like, I obviously enjoy, well, that's not obvious, but I enjoy sex a lot. You have to recalibrate how you think and say about everything, the language you use nowadays. I mean, it's just, and I think it's important, and I think it's good, right? Like, and I need to remind myself, like, that's not you know, a thing, right? Like, and that's good. But,
What do you mean by recalibrating these days? What do you mean?
well, like, I feel like, you know, we just, our language and our perspectives have evolved to encapsulate so many more, to really give descriptors to, voice to so many different ways of being, so many ways of living, so many different ways of loving, that, you know, 20, 30 years ago existed, right? But we just didn't engage with them, or think about them or discuss them in the way that we do now, right? And like,
Mhm.
I, even though for myself, right, like I, like I said, I enjoy sex, but I don't, like, I don't need to have, I can go long periods of time without having sex and be totally fine, right? I can't go
Mhm.
forever, right? um, but like, if it's 2 months, 3 months, I, does not bother me, right?
Mhm.
Does not bother me. And that's a whole other conversation between me and my therapist, right? But like, but that is what it is, right? And so, you know, those were things that, initially at the outset of our relationship just were like, nope, it's just me and you, and that's all it needs to be, and I'm fine with that. And that's how it was.
Uh-huh. So you say that in the past tense. Has that
Yes.
evolved? Do you wanna talk about how that's evolved?
Yeah, I mean, it evolved, but not for anything that has to do with me being bi per se, right? Like, that's just changing dynamics in our relationship and where we are, individually, in terms of sex. And like I said, like, I can go a period of time without it, but I can't go indefinitely without it. And we just, you know, and again, like I am very conscious about, you know, putting my wife's experiences and perspectives through my
Mhm.
lens, right? I'm very, especially on a platform like this. So I won't go too much into it from her end, but like, you know, um, and that was really challenging, right? To just be in sort of radically different places where we are, but still be in an incredibly committed, loving relationship where like I think neither of us really imagine wanting to be with another person for the rest of our lives, right? Like
Mhm.
in this way. So, you know, and part of what's really great about the 21st century is that like we talk, you know, you become more cognizant of, oh, there are other ways that you can do this. And there's no right way or wrong way. It's the way that works for you.
Right.
Um, and so we were able to move to an open relationship, but not, I always say it's not polyamory because, like I said, I still am in a place where I don't need other long-term romantic partner. Like
Right.
I don't know how people do it.
Right. Right.
Like I'm tired hearing it. You know,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, I think it's, I mean, there's this huge sort of, I guess I'll call it a myth, or but there's this huge sort of perception under heteronormativity that romantic attraction and sexual attraction have to be tied together always, and that they're one and the same, and that when you're monogamously married, you only love one person and you only have sex with one person, and they're this, it's the same thing. And what you're saying sort of is a reminder that these things are interrelated, but they don't necessarily operate in identical ways, and that it's very possible, and in fact very common, for people to be monogamous in terms of emotional and romantic connection, but not sexually monogamous. Does that resonate with your
Oh,
experience?
absolutely. And one of the things I have to be really, which is a challenge, you know, really cognizant of is being very upfront about that, right? About being, you know, and that doesn't mean I can't have a close relationship with people I might sleep with, right? Like you could be friends or you could, you know, whatever. But, you know, when it comes to the person who has all of my, not all of it, but like most of my emotional and romantic energy, it's this person. You know, it's my wife, and that's how it's going to be. And, you know, it's just, you know, communication in any of with everyone involved, right? When you're talking about any form of non-monogamy, in my opinion, is the key, the critical factor to making it work ever,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. What did you learn, if anything, about yourself by participating in this project?
Well, one is I think I did learn to get over a little bit of the fear of, you know, even though unlike some other folks that you have in the book who are, you know, more visible than I will be, you know, I'm sort of like, oh, you know, like I don't have to worry too much about like, oh, what if someone from work hears this, or you know, like, oh, you know, it's just not that scary.
Mhm,
You know,
mhm.
it's just not that scary.
Yeah,
Um, and I think that was really a good thing.
cool, cool. I love that that's your answer to that question, because like, I've had
Mhm.
the exact same experience, when asked to put myself out there. It's scary, and I've done it, and every time I've done it, it's rewarding, and, not that there's nothing to think about, and no that the fears were
Yeah.
unwarranted. There are things to think about, but most of the fears have not come true, and the benefits have been greater.
And I think that's the important piece, right? It's like, yeah, all decisions we make have benefits and consequences, right? And some of them are very minimal in terms of consequences, or almost nil, right? But you know, there's a for me, there's a sense that, like, oh, like being part of a project like this, in a book like this, um, is a way, right? That, even though um, being bi isn't the center of my day-to-day life, that I can, you know, put myself out there, and maybe, like you said, something about my story could resonate with someone else, or they could find some comfort in knowing, oh yeah, I'm not alone in this particular thing.
Mhm.
And it also just gives me an opportunity to practice being authentically me, which is always great.
Yeah, beautiful, love it. What's something that you wish you had realized or understood sooner about bisexuality or relationships?
I think I certainly wish when I was a teenager, um, my late teens, like 17, 18, I had realized that, again, that there could be this separation between being bi and then having sex with both men and women, right?
Uh-huh.
Like that I could have just come to terms, or just like sort of incorporated it as a piece of myself, even to myself, earlier,
Uh-huh.
because in my mind was like, well, I'm not going to fool around with a guy, so why do I even, just the fact that I, you know, find guys attractive, and they're, that doesn't really, that's nothing if I'm not going to do anything
Uh-huh.
about it,
Uh-huh.
right? Man, that's not exactly right, you know.
Mhm.
And I wish I just, you know, um, have given myself the permission to inhabit that a little bit more earlier on.
Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. So
Uh,
along those lines, these days, how do you think your sexuality affects your life outside of sex? Like aside from actually having sex, how does it influence your life or come into play?
I don't, I, it's a good question, and I don't know if my sexuality
Yeah.
has that much impact. I mean, like I'm much more, especially as I'm meeting people, right? New people. And if I'm meeting people in social situations, I feel much more comfortable, inhabiting my sexuality, whatever that means, whatever that looks like in the moment, right? Or talking about it, or, and I'm much more upfront about it. But it's not, if anything, I think my perspective on my gender has a lot more impact in my day to day than my sexuality.
Oh, tell us more about that.
Well, it's funny because I was talking about this in therapy, you know, and it's one of those things where, like, I've always viewed myself as, like, oh, I'm a cis male, right? Like that's just what I am, but it's not actually all I am,
Hmm.
and I was talking about this again. It's sort of like with the, being attracted to guys, when I'm younger. Like I remember all throughout college and all throughout, the early '90s. My there was this term. It was like metrosexual, right? And it was used to sort of as a label to talk about men who cared about things that were viewed as traditionally feminine, like your skin and how you looked and being pretty and like every single person I knew would say to me, "Oh yeah, you're that." Right? Like back then. And again, it was like, well, yeah, like, um I have always been drawn. So I'm being very, this is not, I'm not being very clear about this, because it's not very clear to
Right.
me in my mind. So, but,
Makes sense.
it's just like where I am in that space along that continuum of masculinity, femininity, and other, right? I'm in between labels, but in in the absence of a label, like, I just present how I present and I am how I am. Um, and it's always interesting to see how people receive that,
Uh-huh.
because they receive that first more than they receive any news about who I might sleep
Mm,
with, you know.
mm. What kinds of things do you think they pick up on? What do you mean?
Well, it always starts, if it will always begin if I am wearing, I'm not today, but like if I am wearing something that has Hello
Okay.
Kitty on it,
That's what
we'll
I
go
thought
back
you
to
might
her.
say.
Uh, yeah, I mean, because that's always the thing. They're like, and then someone will say to me, "Oh, I love Hello Kitty too," and then I immediately like fanboy slash fangirl out on it, and then I'm like, and so, and it is like, a thing that is probably as far as from traditional masculine as you can get,
Mhm.
in that moment. And it's a very superficial thing, but it is the easiest sort of example. And there are other things I feel like that I am, in how I am that are similar to that. Just in yeah, like in what I feel like I feel comfortable with. There's not a ton of things that are traditionally masculine that I feel really comfortable with.
Uh-huh.
Like, um, and so, what does that mean?
Mhm.
You know,
Right.
I do think it means something in terms of what my gender identity is, but it's not so clear cut.
Uh-huh. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense, even though it's very nebulous, but
Yeah, yeah.
that's where you are and sorting through it. So that makes a lot of sense actually. Do you, how do you think your bisexuality affected your conception of gender or your views of your masculinity these days?
I think it really helped me, you know, like so many things for me. Like I'm multiracial, um, so there's a spectrum there, bisexual, so there's a spectrum there.
Mhm.
Like, I was grew up poor and now I'm not, so there's a spectrum of experience there. So like everything else, it just sort of helped me, but my bisexuality helped me sort of understand that, like, oh, like there's multiple ways to be, um, and it even if it doesn't make sense to me right now, it certainly doesn't need to 100% make sense to everyone else. Um, and it is just who you are, right? Um, and I continue to work at like giving voice to it because I'd like
Mhm.
to in some way. And I know some amazing people who have just like gotten it down for themselves. Like they can sort of put words to how they feel and how they, you know, and I'm like, oh, that's so great. Like, I want to get to that place. Um, you know, but it really, being bi really just sort of helps you fit into that, get into that space where it's like, yeah, I don't have to fit into this one thing or another thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Yeah, and just embrace whatever is there and your authentic self. Thanks for listening to this episode with Charles. There are more than 10 minutes of bonus material on Patreon. Head to patreon.com/Robert Brooks Cohen. I asked Charles what he hopes people will take from his story or get out of it. We circled back to that question of how important is his bisexuality or his queerness in a straight passing relationship, and like when is it important? And I also asked him how his queerness brings him joy, and his answer was really beautiful, but you'll have to head to Patreon to hear it this time. He talked a lot about authenticity and being your unique, weird self and learning to embrace that. Highly recommend it. There's no video for this episode, unfortunately. Well, there is video, but it's just of me. But there is bonus material, so head to patreon.com/Robert Brooks Cohen for that. Thank you so much to everyone there who has subscribed. Thank you also to everyone who has purchased my book, Bisexual Married Men, Stories of Relationships, Acceptance, and Authenticity, and especially to those who have posted about it on social media, on Instagram. I love seeing it. I'm so excited to see what you guys connect with and what you think of the book. If you haven't received your copy yet, I'm sure you'll get it soon. If you haven't ordered it, get on that. It's on my website, robertbrookscohen.com. We'll be back the next few weeks in December with more of these interviews with subjects from the book. And now here's the very tail end of my conversation with Charles. Thanks for listening. Well, it's been great to chat with you again, Charles. I'm so excited that you're in the book and that everyone can hear this and hear you here. And yeah, I can't wait for everyone to read your chapter.
Yeah, and I will probably see you at the center.
Cool. Which will be in the past when this episode airs, but
Yeah.
hopefully you all were there and you saw Charles in person. Yeah, well, thank you again for being here. This was great.
Yeah, same here. It was so good to see you.
Two Bi Guys is produced and edited by me, Robert Brooks Cohen, and it was created by me and Alex Boyd. Our logo art is by Caitlin Weinman. Our music is by Ross Mincer. We are supported by the Gotham, and we are part of the Zencaster Creator Network. Visit patreon.com/Robert Brooks Cohen for bonus content, early access, and exclusive video episodes. Thanks for listening to Two Bi Guys.